Let's start by looking at how globalization affects economic growth. So for economic growth, there is actual growth and potential growth. We'll start by looking at the actual economic growth in terms of the growth in national income. So when tariffs are removed, for example, removal of tariffs, as I mentioned earlier, is a manifestation of globalization. So when tariffs are removed, the exports become relatively cheaper to foreigners. Foreigners will tend to buy more exports from the exporting country. So the export income for the exporting country in this case will increase, and the net export component, which is X minus M, will increase, leading to an increase in aggregate demand. Domestic firms will step up on their production. National income will increase via the multiplier effect. This leads to short-term economic growth, as we know. So in the case of Singapore, we have no import tariffs except on demerit goods. Our import expenditure is relatively constant because we mainly import necessities and factors of production, which have a low price elasticity of demand. And our export income will tend to increase because the price elasticity of demand for our exports is high because we sell mainly high-tech goods, which have many substitutes in the international market. So this analysis will tell us that the removal of tariffs will tend to increase Singapore's national income. So it will benefit us in terms of actual growth. In terms of potential growth, what is the impact? Let us look at how productive capacity will be affected. So when there is lower barrier to FDI, foreign firms will be incentivized to enter the country to set up production. So the investment component, which is the I component, will increase, increasing the aggregate demand, and there will be both short-term and long-term economic growth. So why is there long-term economic growth? Because with FDI, the productivity tends to improve. There is technology transfer from the MNCs, which tend to bring in more superior advanced technology to the receiving country. And there's also demonstration effect in terms of the management strategies that these foreign firms, in particular MNCs, tend to bring into the countries that are receiving FDI. And the workers that they employ from domestic country will be able to pick up some of the management strategies, and eventually this can spread to other firms, even the small, medium enterprises in the domestic firms and in the domestic country. So so that will increase the productivity and the productive capacity of the economy overall. So now let us now look at employment. Well, when the national output increases due to, for example, the export demand and FDI that we mentioned earlier, there will be more employment. Why? Because the demand for labor is derived from the aggregate demand. So when foreign firms such as MNCs like IBM, Panasonic, Mitsui Chemicals, they bring in various job opportunities for Singaporeans, that's an example of how our employment rate has benefited from this increased globalization. MNCs, however, they may tend to employ native professionals more than the workers from the host countries, especially in new industries. So in the case of Singapore, previously, the foreign banks that have entered Singapore back in the last century, they would tend to employ more of their own native financial professionals. So in the earlier periods, we are unable to impose the employment ratio, which is the ratio of our own workers to the foreign workers that the MNCs bring in. So that is a point to consider for the evaluating exactly how much we have benefited. But there's also another problem that globalization will bring about, and that is the problem of structural unemployment. In developed economies especially, there is a factor immobility in the short run. So that has led to things like anti-globalization movements in the West because they have lost their comparative advantage to emerging economies in labor-intensive or low-skilled manufacturing. And these low-skilled workers in the more economically developed countries, they will lose employment to the workers in other emerging economies, right? And also, the ease of capital flows will result in more offshoring and greater ease of moving production overseas. So that's what we mean when we say that MNCs are footloose. They tend to move their productions to other places easily, and that will result in job loss or uncertainty and instability in the economy in general. So in the case of Singapore and Hong Kong, we tend to face such problems because when our rental and labor costs increases as the cost of living increases, such things will also tend to increase, like rental costs, labor costs. And MNCs such as maybe Siemens, Philips, they have shifted their productions and assembly factories to elsewhere, like to our neighbors like Indonesia and Malaysia. So that's why we always say that our neighbors are like the most formidable competitors in some sense, right? So this problem with structural unemployment can actually be solved in the long term with training, because it is mainly a problem caused by the factor immobility in the short run. So with training, we are expected to be able to reduce such unemployment problems. But prolonged unemployment will cause misery, and that requires government intervention. So that justifies why the government needs to mitigate the positive short-term negative effects from globalization. For the balance of payments, it is likely to improve for Singapore through the current account, because we can do that by the analysis that we did previously using the price elasticity of demand for exports and for imports. For our import expenditure is likely to drop also because of cheaper imports available from other countries. In terms of inflation, there are various forces involved. So demand pull inflation is likely if the country is close to full employment. So when a country is close to full employment, the general price level is likely to increase more than proportionately when there's an increase in aggregate demand. However, there's also access to cheaper foreign factors of production. For example, imported factors from China, and that will reduce the cost of production, and the aggregate supply will tend to shift down, and that dampens the cost push inflation. So, increased productive capacity, like I mentioned earlier, from technology transfer, etc., will cause the AS to shift out, and that it will reduce the long-run inflationary pressure.